In the freezing cold of the North Atlantic, a steadfast hunter stalks its prey with all-seeing eyes. Deep under the ocean, Soviet submarines hide from their most formidable foe, the Canadair CP-107 Argus, Canada's premier Cold War sub-hunter. During the Second World War, Canada maintained a potent anti-submarine warfare, or ASW fleet, against marauding German submarines. The region in between Canada, Greenland, and Iceland, not covered by shore-based ASW aircraft, was known as the Mid-Atlantic Gap. Submarines operated freely in this region, and the Allies were desperate for a solution. Canada adopted the American-built B-24 Liberator VLR, where VLR stands for Very Long Range. These allowed the Allies to close the Mid-Atlantic Gap and provide cover for convoys traveling between North America and Europe. With the conclusion of the war, all the B-24 VLRs were deemed surplus war material and were scrapped. The military didn't see a need to maintain an ASW capability now that the German U-boat threat was gone. As tensions with the Soviet Union increased, the need to monitor trade routes across the Atlantic became a pressing matter. Of particular interest was the growing Soviet submarine fleet. By the early 1950s, Canada was scrambling to regain supremacy over the North Atlantic. With the B-24s long gone, the legendary Lancaster Mark 10s in storage in the prairies were reactivated and flown to the East Coast for refitting. 60 were operating with Maritime Air Command starting in the late 1940s. Almost as soon as the Lancasters were operational, it was clear that they were not up for the growing challenge. There was a pressing need for a modern long-range ASW aircraft to patrol the North Atlantic. While the procurement process for the new aircraft was ongoing, there was an interim need to enhance the capabilities of Marine Air Command before the new aircraft was ready. This need was filled by the American-built CP-122 Neptune. A total of 25 Neptunes were taken on strength to supplement the dwindling supply of Lancasters. They remained in service much longer than anticipated, and were finally fully retired in 1968. In the late 1940s, Canadair came up with a proposed set of requirements for the RCAF to build a modified version of their North Star transport into an ASW aircraft. The new aircraft would have a longer range and greater loiter time than any existing or proposed ASW platform. The RCAF considered the design, and then in 1949 they listed out their own set of specifications for the aircraft. Canadair was directed to produce the preliminary design based on the Douglas DC-6. However, it was found that the new aircraft built on DC-6 components would fail to meet all the new requirements. The Lockheed Constellation and Douglas DC-7 were also evaluated and found to be unsuitable for the intended role. A more capable base aircraft was needed, and it just so happened that a suitable design was being built in England, the Bristol 175, also known as the Britannia. Although the design was promising and seemed to be able to fulfill all of the RCAF's requirements, it had not yet taken its first flight, and so its performance had not yet been confirmed. The leaders of the RCAF, and Air Marshal Curtis in particular, wanted to avoid delays, so their new plane would be ready in time to take over from the aging Lancasters and Neptunes. They took a risk on the promising Britannia, and worked out a contract with the British before the prototype was ready. The RCAF hoped that the Britannia could be mass-produced in Canada, and used as the base for the ASW aircraft, a new long-range transport aircraft, and a civilian passenger aircraft. The passenger cargo variant would eventually be called the CC-106 Yukon. It was agreed that Bristol would produce the common parts to all designs, while Canada would build any new or modified components. It was hoped that the quantity of production in Canada would offset the higher labor costs and make it more affordable in the long run. The gamble paid off. The Britannia was a fine plane. Now the challenge for Canadair was to adapt a plane meant for high speeds and high altitudes to the low and slow requirements for hunting subs. The fuselage would have to be completely redesigned for the new role, as there was no need for a heavy pressurized cabin. Canadair's new CL-28 Argus, named after the all-seeing Greek god with 100 eyes, took the 43.4 meter wings, 12.4 meter tall tail, and landing gear from the Britannia, and added a new unpressurized fuselage and engines optimized for low-altitude flight. The new fuselage was 40.4 meters long and contained the cockpit, crew tactical compartment, sensors, and 2 weapons bays. The crew of the Argus was its most crucial component. It was normally made up of 3 pilots in the cockpit, 2 engineers in the flight engineer station, and a long-range navigator in the routine navigation station. An additional 3 tactical navigators and 6 airborne electronic system operators were located in the tactical and detection compartment. Lookout stations were also scattered around the Argus and were manned by whoever was free at the time. The crew rest area had 4 passenger seats and 4 bunks for off-duty crew members. The galley contained an electric stove, oven, sink, and refrigerator, and was capable of providing in-flight meals on long-duration missions. The Argus was the first extensive use of titanium in aircraft construction in Canada. As a weight-saving measure, a total of 1,225 kilograms of titanium were used in each airframe to replace the heavy stainless steel firewalls for the engines. The use of titanium in this way shaved 408 kilograms off the total weight. The new engines were selected and optimized for low-altitude, long-duration missions. The Argus was equipped with 4 Wright R3350 TC981 EA1 18-cylinder twin-row radial air-cooled turbo-compound piston engines. Each engine was rated at 3,400 horsepower, using 115/145 octane fuel. The 3,700 horsepower rating was the wet power rating. Wet power was used at takeoff to temporarily increase engine performance by reducing the fuel mixture and injecting a fluid made from 40% water and 60% methanol. The 3-bladed propellers were 4.72 meters in diameter and were equipped with a de-icer along the leading edge. The pitch of each blade was electrically operated and allowed for thrust reversal. The Argus carried 30,815 liters, or 21,686 kilograms of fuel, in 9 cells in each wing. This tremendous amount of fuel, which made up a third of the overall takeoff weight, combined with good fuel economy of the engines, gave the Argus a range of 8,190 kilometers and an endurance in excess of 26.5 hours. The range and endurance was actually limited by the engine's oil reserves. They contained only 303 liters each and would often run out before the fuel reserves ran dry. The Canadian military wanted the most effective land-based submarine hunter possible, and would spare no expense in achieving that. As a result, the Argus was equipped with all the most advanced submarine fighting technology that was available at the time. This included both active and passive sensors for detecting the submarines, and a large supply of weapons for attacking them. The most noticeable sensor on the Argus was the chin-mounted AN/APS-20 search radar. This radar was installed on the first 13 airframes. It was a high-powered S-band radar. This meant that while it was good at long range, sea clutter made detection difficult at short ranges, and so small objects like submarine snorkels were almost invisible. It also had trouble with high sea states and was replaced in subsequent models. The following 20 Mark II Arguses had the improved ASV-21 search radar installed. The ASV-21 was medium powered and operated in the shorter X-band range. This made short-range detection of small objects, like submarine snorkels, much easier. The other highly noticeable sensor on the Argus was a sensitive magnetometer. The ASQ-8 magnetic anomaly detector was built into a large tail boom structure which helped isolate it from the other electronic systems on board. It was capable of detecting small variations in the Earth's magnetic field as a result of the presence of large metallic objects, such as submarines, beneath the surface. This allowed Argus crews to confirm the presence and to pinpoint the location of a submarine before attacking. The AN/ALR-8 electronic surveillance measures had receivers scattered around the airframe and was used to detect the presence of submarine and surface vessel radars. Submarines typically have rather unique signatures, and so identifying them wasn't too difficult. Surface vessels, however, used a much more common commercial radar, and were more difficult to identify as a result. The exhaust trail indicator had an intake near the cockpit and could detect emissions of unburnt fuel from combustion engines. While this could help find diesel-electric submarines, there was a lot of ambient pollution that made detection using the ETI difficult. Later, with nuclear submarines, this was no longer useful in its primary role. The main sensor system on board the Argus was the low-frequency analyzer and recorder, codenamed Jezebel. Sonobuoys were launched from the ASW stores ejector. After hitting the water, one part would remain at the surface and act as a transmitter, while the hydrophone part sank to a predetermined depth and began receiving. Transmissions from the sonobuoys were related to the Jezebel operators for analysis, and provided an effective passive means of hunting submarines. Explosive echo ranging, codenamed Julie, was the active means of hunting submarines. It used the same sonobuoy techniques as Jezebel, but were followed by the release of small explosive charges. The detonation of these charges resulted in echoes from the target that were picked up by the passive sonobuoys and then transmitted back to the aircraft for analysis. Information from the sensors on board the Argus were integrated together using the Air Navigation and Tactical Control System, or ANTAC. ANTAC was the most technologically advanced navigation system of its time. It was designed and produced in Canada by Computing Devices of Canada Limited in Ottawa, Ontario, specifically for use in the Argus. The system allowed for accurate navigation even in the polar regions. ANTAC was used by the tactical navigator to combine the inputs of the other sensors to give a full tactical picture of the situation. In the search and rescue role, the Argus was equipped with the Search and Rescue and Homing, or SARA system. The Argus also had a 70 million candle power searchlight for nighttime surveillance mounted on the right wing. The Argus had two large weapon bays capable of storing 3,629 kilograms of torpedoes, depth bombs, and mines. The types of weapons carried depended on the intended target and evolved over the years in response to a changing threat. The most basic weapon carried by the Argus was the Mark 54 depth bomb. These were flat-headed bombs set to detonate at a specific depth. The shockwave caused by the explosion could damage and rupture the hulls of submerged submarines. In use since the Second World War, they were initially considered effective, but were eventually deemed obsolete and phased out by 1979. The main offensive weapon was torpedoes. The Argus was initially equipped with British-made Mark 30 passive acoustic homing torpedoes. These torpedoes were large and slow and deemed obsolete by the end of the 1950s. They worked well against the louder diesel-electric submarines, but newer, deeper diving and quieter nuclear submarines precipitated the need for active guidance torpedoes. The Mark 30 was supplemented by the smaller American-made Mark 43 torpedoes, which could dive deeper but had a shorter range. Both of these types were replaced by the Mark 44 active sonar homing torpedoes in response to the deployment of much quieter and even deeper diving nuclear submarines. These would in turn be replaced by the Mark 46 when it was found that the Mark 44 was too slow to be effective against the latest Soviet subs. The Mark 46 is still considered highly effective, and is operational with fleets around the world. The Argus also had the capability to lay Mark 36 mines, but this capability was never exercised. Largely unknown to the public up until recently, the Argus was also wired up for and capable of releasing a Mark 57 or Mark 101 nuclear depth bomb. While these weapons were not stored at Argus bases, they could be quickly provided by the United States if deemed necessary. Canadair rolled out the first airframe on December 21, 1956, and it took its first flight on the 28th of March 1957. Training on the new type began at No. 2 OTU Detachment in Greenwood, Nova Scotia, starting in March 1958. On May 17th of the same year, Argus Day marked the introduction of the Argus into Maritime Air Command at RCAF Station Greenwood. 5 aircraft were available at that time for displays and demonstrations. By May of the following year, the crews were ready, and all 5 were brought on strength with No. 405 Eagle Squadron, based in Greenwood, Nova Scotia. Next to form was the CEPE Climatic Detachment, in Cold Lake, Alberta, which explored the Argus's performance in Arctic conditions, and the Air Armament Evaluation Detachment, which explored potential weapon systems. These were both formed in early 1958, and were disbanded by 1961. The AAED in Cold Lake explored the idea of using the American-built Bullpup air-to-surface missile in the anti-shipping role. Trials found that the Argus wasn't a suitable platform for the Bullpup due to its low angle of attack. The second operational unit to form was No. 404 Buffalo Squadron, also based in Greenwood. They received their first Argus in April 1959, and their Neptunes were all replaced by August of the same year. In July 1959, the Maritime Proving and Evaluation Unit was formed at Summerside, p.e.i. to explore new ASW systems and tactics. In 1971, an Argus was installed with a side-looking radar, or SLAR. This gave rise to the Slargus. Operational tests were performed to study ice formations in the Arctic. The Slargus program ended in 1977, the equipment was removed, and the Argus returned to regular service. The second unit to form at Summerside was No. 415 Swordfish Squadron in June 1961. 415 was temporarily deployed to CFB Edmonton on January 30, 1978 to support Operation Morning Light. A Soviet nuclear-powered radar ocean reconnaissance satellite, Cosmos 954, had crashed in the Northwest Territories, and the RCAF deployed the Argus to find its remains. On May 24, 1968, No. 449 Squadron was formed as a training unit to take over from No. 2 OTU when it was disbanded following unification. It operated until 1975 when it was disbanded and operational training unit was taken over by the 404. Also in May of 1968, the only West Coast unit, No. 407 Demon Squadron, was formed in Comox, British Columbia. They flew the Mark 1s over the North Pacific until 1981. Once Canadair had completed production, a total of 13 Mark 1 and 20 Mark 2 Arguses had been built. The differences between the two models are the search radar, ECM antenna, different navigation, communication, and tactical electronics equipment. The Mark 1 and Mark 2 Argus can be differentiated by the shape of the radome mounted on the aircraft's chin. The Argus could cover a variety of missions, ranging from search and rescue to penetration of air defense missions in Soviet Russia. However, the bulk of the missions, and the main purpose of the Argus, was for anti-submarine warfare. The Argus was used in much the same way as the CF-100 interceptors guarding the northern airspace. When a Russian bomber makes a run at the border, CF-100 interceptors are deployed to check out the contact. Similarly, the Argus would be sent out to investigate whenever a submarine or unknown surface contact was picked up in the North Atlantic. To fulfill its responsibility, the Argus was continuously on 2-hour alert so they could quickly respond to any contacts in the Canadian area of responsibility. One of the initial and most vital sources of information about foreign fleet movement came from the secretive SOSA system. The U.S. Navy's ocean surveillance system was a network of hydrophones fixed under the sea floor. These shore-based assets could listen into and detect the passing submarines or surface contacts. This established a submarine probability area, or SPA, and the Argus crews would get to work planning out a route to get there and what to bring with them. Ground crews prepare the aircraft and load the appropriate ASW stores and weapons. The crew prepares for their 17 to 20-hour mission and load into the plane. The pilot calls for wet power and the Argus lifts off. The transit from their base to the search area was done at 2,700 meters altitude. Once they arrive in the SPA, they descend to 1,500 meters and begin to lay a field of sonobuoys, activate the search radar, make visual observations for snorkels, listen for electronic emissions with the ESM, and sniff the air for exhaust using the ETI. Once a contact was made, they would drop additional sonobuoys to start narrowing down the submarine's location, heading, and speed. The Argus then descends to 90 meters, flying at 330 kilometers per hour, and uses the magnetic anomaly detector to pinpoint the sub's exact position. In peacetime, this would be the end of the story, but in wartime, they would continue to the next phase: attack. With the final position obtained with the MAD, the Argus would begin its attack run by dropping torpedoes or depth bombs. They would then begin a large turning circle and use the MAD to detect whether the sub was trying to escape. Operators would listen for explosions or signs the sub was maneuvering away. If necessary, the Argus would line up for another attack run and repeat the process until the sub was destroyed or the weapon stores had been exhausted. The capabilities of the Argus were put to the test in the fall of 1962. The Soviet Union had deployed SS-5 Skeen medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba in response to the American deployment of Jupiter missiles in Turkey. This led to the Cuban Missile Crisis and brought the world's superpowers to the brink of an all-out war. The RCAF and RCN deployed the Argus to monitor Soviet merchant shipping, attempting to deliver additional missile systems to the island. They established an air barrier across the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom gap using 24 aircraft operating out of Greenwood, Nova Scotia. 3 Argus aircraft were patrolling this area 24 hours a day during the standoff. They carried a full war load consisting of Mark 43 torpedoes and Mark 54 depth bombs. So many sonobuoys were used in this time that supplies became dangerously depleted and had to be resupplied by the United States Navy. They also hunted for Soviet Zulu-class submarines off the coast of Massachusetts, taking over for the U.S. Navy that had redeployed their forces further south. By October 28, 1962, the conflict was more or less resolved. The missiles in Cuba and Turkey would be removed, and the threat of an all-out war dissipated. In addition to its role as an ASW platform, it is rumored that it also undertook missions to test the air defenses of the Soviet Union. Although it hasn't been made public yet, Argus crews would work together with American B-52 crews to undertake low-level penetrations of Soviet air defenses. This provocative behavior was done to monitor radar activity and interception techniques. Once detected, the Argus would turn around and head back over the neutral ocean. The Argus also excelled in its role to monitor military and commercial surface ships. The search radar worked well, and once acquired, the Argus would make several low-level passes to determine the identity and cargo of the ship. If necessary, it could also attack these surface ships. There were a number of accidents and noteworthy events over the years, thanks to jammed or damaged controls, bird strikes, and landing gear problems. Of particular note were the 3 fatal accidents involving the Argus. The first occurred on March 23, 1965, during a NATO exercise called Maple Spring. The crew of Argus 20727 from the Argus Conversion Unit was searching for a Royal Navy submarine when it crashed off the coast of Puerto Rico. All 16 personnel on board died. No official reason for the crash has ever been made public. The second accident occurred on March 24, 1966, when a flight engineer was sucked out of the rear camera hatch. They were on a routine training flight over the Bay of Fundy. Several other assets were involved in the subsequent search and rescue efforts, but his body was never found. This accident followed a similar near-fatal ejection from the front entrance door 3 years earlier. The third fatal accident occurred on March 31, 1977, when Argus 10737 from 415 Squadron was returning home from a search and rescue mission. They attempted a landing in heavy fog and high winds. After bouncing several times on the runway, they struck a parked Lockheed Electra and the 2 caught fire. 15 crew members were able to escape from the wreckage, but tragically a 16th crew member later died in hospital from severe burns. By the early 1950s, the Argus had accumulated an average of more than 10,000 hours flying time and were starting to show their age. The 115/145 octane fuel for the Argus was becoming difficult to source, and operational costs were increasing. The electronic systems were also showing their age. Technology had advanced considerably into the solid-state digital era, and the old vacuum tubes used on board the Argus couldn't be replaced. Airframe corrosion was also a problem from years of flying over the open ocean. All of these factors contributed to the need to replace the Argus. That process started in 1972, when the government issued a tender for a new long-range patrol aircraft. The Boeing 707-320 ASW, Hawker Siddeley Nimrod, and Lockheed P-3C Orion were all considered. The Orion was selected and modified to include the sensor suite from the S-3A Viking, and some additional sensors needed for Arctic patrol missions. The first Orions, given the designation CP-140 Aurora, were delivered starting in 1979. In 1975, the reduction of the Argus fleet began with the disbanding of 449 Maritime Training Squadron at CFB Greenwood. CFB Summerside was designated as the disposal site for the Argus. In 1975, there were 5. By 1980, there were 18. And by 1981, there were a total of 24 delivered to Summerside as the Auroras came online. Attempts to sell the Argus to other maritime nations failed. The last operational flight of the Argus took place on July 24, 1981, when the last Argus from CFB Greenwood was flown to Summerside. 5 were retained in museum collections, and the rest were sold to Bristol Metal Industries and rendered into scrap metal. In its day, the Argus was the most formidable anti-submarine warfare platform fielded by any NATO country. It served on the front line of the Cold War and kept the Soviet submarine threat in check for almost 25 years.